Perhaps the best clues to where America is going can be found in where we've been. And that means having unique insight into the 45 men who have served as our president since the beginning. David Rubenstein is a New York Times best-selling author, co-founder of the Carlyle Group, a global investment firm, and the 2025 recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom. That is the nation's highest civilian honor, presented for exemplary contributions to the prosperity and values of the United States. His latest book, The Highest Calling: Conversations on the American Presidency. David joins me now. First of all, congratulations on that Medal of Honor. A very small group of people, sir, and it's
Thank you very much.
Job well done.
I was honored to get it. I was honored to get it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
So now, look, the book is called The Highest Calling: Conversations on the American Presidency. You open the book by recognizing that you absolutely expect people to ask you, do we really need another book about the presidents? We've got plenty. There's only 45. I would answer that by saying we can never learn enough. But let me pose this question to you, which is, how much does a president reflect the values of his day versus how much does a president influence the societal values of the day?
Well, of course, it depends on the president. There's no doubt that presidents are affected by events around the world and the country, and they adapt themselves to that. But no doubt, you have a strong personality, you have a strong leader, he can make a real difference. Abraham Lincoln made a real difference as president of the United States. If a weaker person had been president, I doubt that the Union would have stayed together.
You write some really interesting, by the way, you have a chapter on every president here. I should note, you talk to presidential biographers, historians, staffers. You even talk to several of the presidents, of course. But when it came to Lincoln, you in your interview about him, you go on to say there were circumstances under which Lincoln would have actually permitted slavery to continue. So is a president's success tied to how well he reads the pulse of society, or once again, how well he can direct that pulse?
Well, in Lincoln's case, he was not an abolitionist, and he said many times, if preserving the Union meant keeping slavery intact, he would have done that. He ultimately issued the Emancipation Proclamation, but it was really designed to help win the war because he wanted freed slaves to fight for the Union, which they did. About 200,000 freed slaves fought for the Union, and it helped very much in the winning the war.
In your life, of course, you are no stranger to politics. You worked for then Governor Jimmy Carter and beyond. So since we just said goodbye to President Carter, I sort of want to focus in on him for a question and ask, how did he change over the years? I mean, he made it clear, we came to really focus that he didn't like the trappings. He didn't want Hail to the Chief to be played. He was a very common man. Did you see a change over the years with him?
Well, he was president for 4 years and ex-president for 44 years. In those 44 years, he, I think, softened a bit. I mean, he was fairly rigid in the way he looked at things. He always wanted to do things the way an engineer would do them, put them together in a certain precise way. As he got older, he recognized that you can't always get what you want and you have to accommodate other people's interests. But Carter did an incredible job as a former president, and that for those activities, he did win the Nobel Peace Prize. So I think the going away that he received at the National Cathedral was appropriate for what he did for the country.
You know, the fascinating thing about having a chapter on every president and have you, of course, comment all the way through is we get the earliest presidents, Washington, Adams, and Jefferson, Lincoln, FDR, JFK, all the way through Truman, Trump, and Biden. Is there a through line? Is there a consistent characteristic that you found studying all of these men, regardless of the historical time in which they lived, that is shared across presidency, maybe judgment or courage, something that you see that defines a president?
Well, usually they come from backgrounds where it would not have been expected they would be president of the United States. Most of them come from very humble backgrounds. It's very rare that somebody is thought at the time that he is a boy that he's going to be president of the United States. They also, when they are president of the United States, they really want to do what they think is best for the country. Now, obviously, they have different views compared to everybody else about what might be the best, but presidents tend to be humbled by the job, and they truly are trying to figure out what is the best for the country. Now, when you've got 330 million people, it's not easy to figure out what's best for all 330 million, and that leads to political disputes. But I think generally the country has a reason to be proud of most of the people who've served as president of the United States. Not all of them were spectacular, for sure, but most of them have been pretty impressive.
Yeah, my parents thought I would be president. They were totally wrong about that. You also note in the book that if given a chance, you would have interviewed Abraham Lincoln. And you highlight, and it really highlighted for me, that when you look at the early presidents, and many of them, we don't have interviews with. They didn't sit down with Vogue magazine. So why Lincoln? Is it because he didn't give any interviews at the time? And then secondly, I was curious as to your impact on these presidents, those who we know only through their writings, and those who we get to see in television, radio, and such.
The interview format that you and I are engaging in now was developed in television in the 1950s or so. But in the 1850s, or even in the early part of the 20th century, it wasn't a regular part of the American discourse or anywhere in the world to have an interview. And so there are no interviews with Washington or Lincoln or people like that. Maybe when artificial intelligence is even further developed, we can go back and say, what would somebody have said if it was Lincoln or Washington in an interview? But right now, we don't have that. The reason I would like to interview him is because he was, without doubt, the greatest president of the United States. He kept the Union together. He freed the slaves. He exhibited humility. And he basically was a role model for so many people because of the humility that he showed. He didn't go around the White House bragging, I just won the Civil War. I just did the Gettysburg Address. Aren't I brilliant? He just didn't have that kind of approach to life. And I think for that reason, I think had he lived past the age of 56 and he lived through Reconstruction, I think Reconstruction would have been much better than it ultimately turned out to be.
You also note that very few presidents get out of that office without their reputation being scathed. For history, you identify Ike, Reagan, and Obama as exceptions to that, with very conservative detractors aside. What makes somebody want to become president? Ike didn't need it.
I think there's a general feeling that when you're president of the United States, you are helping other people, you're helping your country, and it's a calling that some people get to particularly when they're in government and politics. And I think it's, the highest calling in mankind in many ways, because you are the most important person on the face of the earth. You have about 8 billion people on the face of the earth, and you have an impact on every single one of them when you're president of the United States. No other leader in the world has that impact.
Final question for you. You note in the book a third of eligible voters don't vote. By reading this book for young people, older people, what do you hope will inspire them to vote in the future?
Well, I hope people will learn more about our civics and our government, our history, because we don't know that much about it, relatively speaking. Only a third of Americans who can vote are not voting. And that's not a good thing for our democracy. And I think basically, if you have a participatory democracy, you really need to have people participate if it's going to work well.
All right. Well, congratulations again on your award, the Congressional Medal of Freedom. That is amazing. The book is called The Highest Calling: Conversations on the American Presidency. For more information, go to simonandschuster.com. David Rubenstein, congratulations. Amazing book. Thank you.
Thank you.